Muy buenos días a todos. Estamos permitiendo en este momento el acceso a todos los participantes a la sala. Esto puede demorar un par de minutos. Les agradecemos su paciencia y su puntualidad. En un par de minutos estaremos iniciando, tan pronto puedan acceder la mayoría de los participantes. Muy buenos días. Por respeto a todos ustedes que han asistido puntualmente, vamos a dar inicio con la conferencia. En nombre del Comité Organizador del Séptimo Congreso Nacional y Segundo Internacional de Estudiantes de Comercio Exterior de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo, les damos la más cordial bienvenida a estas primeras dos conferencias del día de hoy. Good morning on behalf of the Organizing Committee of the Seventh National and Second International Student Congress of Foreign Trade of the Autonomous University of the State of Hidalgo. We give you the warmest welcome to these first two conferences today. On this morning, en esta mañana, nos acompañan el Dr. Henning Kerr y el Dr. Martin Keim de Hochschule Worms, de Universidad de Ciencias Aplicadas de Alemania, quienes impartirán un par de conferencias para todos nosotros. This morning, we are joined by Dr. Henning Kerr and Dr. Martin Keim from Hochschule Worms, University of Applied Sciences of Germany, who will deliver a couple of lectures for us. Daremos inicio con la participación del Dr. Kerr y al término de su intervención continuaremos con el Dr. Keim. We will start with the participation of Dr. Henning Kerr, and at the end of his intervention, we will continue with Dr. Martin Keim. Ambas conferencias serán impartidas en inglés sin traducción simultánea, por lo que les invitamos a buscar las mejores condiciones de audio posibles. Both conferences will be delivered in English without simultaneous translation, so we invite you to find the best available audio connections. Demos inicio entonces con nuestra primera conferencia. Let's begin with our first lecture. Henning Kerr es graduado en estudios comerciales por la Universidad Johannes Gutenberg y en administración bancaria en la escuela Deutscher Genossenschaften. I'm sorry, Dr. Kerr, if my German is not very good. I'm trying my best. Y es adicionalmente doctor en economía agrícola por la Universidad Hohenheim. Henning Kerr is a graduate in commercial studies from the Johannes Gutenberg University and graduate in banking business administration from Deutscher Genossenschaften Academy. He has got a doctorate degree in agriculture and economics from Hohenheim University. Cuenta con más de 10 años de experiencia como conferencista y profesor en el campo de la economía, banca y administración de negocios, así como director de la maestría en Administración Internacional de Negocios y Comercio Exterior de la Universidad de Ciencias Aplicadas de Worms. He has more than 10 years of experience as lecturer and professor in the field of economics, banking, and business administration, and has been head of the master's program in international business administration and foreign trade at the University of Applied Sciences, Worms. En la Administración de Instituciones Educativas ha sido vicepresidente para Investigación y Cooperación Empresarial y en el Centro Internacional de la Universidad de Ciencias Aplicadas de Worms. Dr. Kerr has also experience in executive institutions management as Vice President for Research, Cooperation with Companies, and the International Center of the University of Applied Sciences Worms. El Dr. Kerr es experto en los campos del comercio exterior, finanzas y consultoría, así como en aprendizaje híbrido y a distancia. He has comprehensive expertise in the fields of foreign trade, as financing and consulting, and in blended and distance learning. Asimismo, tiene amplia experiencia en el área de banca, particularmente en comercio exterior y banca privada. He's also an expert in banking, areas of international trade and private banking. Es autor de artículos y libros en áreas como inversión extranjera, banca internacional y negocios internacionales. Dr. Kerr is an accomplished writer of articles and books in areas such as foreign investment, international banking, and international business. Actualmente es vicepresidente de la Hochschule Worms University of Applied Sciences en Alemania, institución con la que la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo cuenta con un convenio de colaboración académica y de investigación. He is currently Vice President of the Hochschule Worms University of Applied Sciences in Germany, an institution with which the Autonomous University of the State of Hidalgo holds an academic and research collaboration agreement. Presentando la conferencia Política Monetaria del Banco Central en tiempos de turbulencia, demos la bienvenida al Dr. Henning Kerr. Presenting Central Bank Policy in Times of Turbulence, let's give Dr. Henning Kerr a warm welcome. Welcome, Dr. Kerr.
Many thanks for the friendly words and the warm welcome to your conference. Buenos dias a todo. Sorry for not speaking Spanish. So it would be boring for you if I only can speak hola and muchas gracias. So therefore, and the lecture in English. So sorry for that. Last time we had a presentation on foreign direct investment that was really related to international business. Today, it seems not to be directly related to international business, but I try to show you that is that also a part of international business. First of all, I have to say it's great to take part in your conference, even in times of the COVID-19 pandemic situation and less chances to travel, and Zoom and other video conference systems make it possible that we have the chance to make a common conference. So many thanks for organizing this conference. And now I try to show the relevance of the central bank policy in times of turbulence. And there I will have some actual questions at the end. So my agenda is first concentrating on the inflation, because that's one of the, let's say, aims or goals of the central bank policy, not to have a high inflation rate. And depending on that, we have a situation on the market for the yield of, here in my case, I have the example of the United States of America and Germany. Then I'm focusing on corporate financing, and then on the purchasing program here, in particularly the European Central Bank's purchasing program. But nevertheless, it would be really very, very similar to that one in the United States. But the effects, and that's my fifth topic then, the effects on the market are very different. And therefore, I have to compare also different countries. So starting with the inflation in different countries. On a global basis, we will see that it seems to a very stable inflation rate over the next years. So if you will have a look on, this chart starts in the year 2016 with nearly 3% on a global inflation rate base. It's increasing a little bit because of a very, very good economic situation in the world. Then, pandemic situation, it's declining a little bit, but then because of the recovery in 2021, it's increasing again, then declining perhaps. That's a forecast. So that's on a global basis, but the situation in the countries are really different. So my first example, your country, Mexico. You see here that we have around about 4% last year in October. Then it's decreasing, all the situation of COVID-19. But then a sharp increase up to 6%. Then perhaps it's going down a little bit, but how far? And therefore, the central banks are using the so-called core inflation rate. That means we excluded the goods which are really with a high fluctuation in prices. That mainly are the goods of food, for example, of some services perhaps, or also some commodities. Excluded this with a very special, perhaps sometimes influence on a high inflation rate. If we exclude that, you see the development, and then also the forecast is really with increasing inflation rate. The usual policy of a central bank then is to increase the interest rates. Because of what? To stop this inflation. So that is the situation at the moment for Mexico. Here I have a little bit of text. I will provide you with the whole presentation afterwards, then will you have the chance also to read and to have a little follow-up for that presentation. United States. You see, that's, you might say, similar to the Mexican situation. But if you look then on the core inflation, you see that for the United States, it's really running down. So the central bank policy, that means the Fed policy, might be a little bit different to that one in Mexico. So it's not the pressure in the same way to increase perhaps interest rates. What's the situation? Then here also some words, you can follow them. I have mentioned the main aspects. Germany. So we are coming from a minus, and that's also sometimes a little bit of a critical situation because of decreasing prices might lead into a recession as well. So, but starting with January, we had an increase of inflation as well. Why do we have that? And we will have a look on the core inflation again. Core inflation is not the same as the inflation in a whole. The situation here is that we had a lower value-added tax last year, so we increased the value-added tax starting January. The next one was that we have higher prices on CO2 emissions. So the companies have some certificates for CO2 emissions and some more influencing aspects as also the recovery of the economy. So very similar to that one of the euro area in a whole. And also the core inflation then is running down. But now, and that is depending on the supply chain and all the problems with the higher prices for commodities and the really, really increasing prices for transportation. So for example, transportation for a container from, let's say, from Asia, might be to Mexico, might be to Europe, is a minimum that 3 times as high as last year. So all these effects are now on inflation rate. And therefore, as well as in the United States and here in Europe, we are discussing that the central banks have to lower their purchasing programs. I will come to that later on. Here again, you see, I've highlighted a little bit energy cost and others are influencing the inflation rate in Europe. Therefore, situation on the market for here in the first case, US 10 years bond, the yield is at round about 1.34. But a positive one. You see, it's decreasing since May this year. Situation in Germany, oh, it's a little bit different. You see that? First one, we have a minus. So if you lend the German government, some money, you have to pay for it. So that's the first astonishing situation. And then you see we have an increasing yield for the 10 years bond, for the German 10 years bond. There are many influencing factors. There might be recovery of the economy, might be higher prices for commodities, and then the effects, therefore, of this central bank policy. That's coming to the next, and I try to show you why I've done it in different topics. First inflation, then yield, then now corporate financing, and then to put all these factors together and show you the effects. So next topic, corporate financing. If you look on the components of corporate financing, on the here slide, I took that from the German central bank, the Deutsche Bundesbank, that had been the central bank for Germany, or is the central bank for Germany, but not responsible for the euro policy. So external financing here on the right hand, you have the chance to finance with equity or with debt capital. Now let's have a look on the very right side, debt capital. Now we have debt securities, for example, we have bank loans. And I will really focus on these two. So if companies have the chance to finance via debt securities, they have to issue some corporate bonds, for example. If they finance via bank loans, they have to go to their bank and negotiate the credit there. So these are mostly the two main financing. Now, the next and the interesting thing I will explain, the supply of debt capital to SMEs. So here in Europe, and in particularly in Germany, the debt capital is provided by the banks. And here in Germany, we have some would say a very high competition between the so-called commercial banks, regionally oriented savings banks, and a cooperative bank. We call that in Germany the 3 pillars because they are really isolated a little bit. So, but you may be a customer of all these 3 pillars. If you now compare the financial situation of small and mid-sized companies to that one of the multinationals. Then the first look on the share of liabilities to banks. So that's a financing via bank loans and not with securities. The share of liabilities to banks for SMEs, you see, starting in 2003, around about nearly 40%. Yeah, it's running down a little bit, but it's nevertheless the main financing source for the small and mid-sized companies. If you look for the multinationals, you see, it's not so important for them because they have a lower share, the half of it, via bank loans. So the other main source is then securities, and they have the chance to finance via securities. And that might be the reason why we have also a different interest expense ratio. So the part of interest rates to pay in terms of expense, of the part of expenses. So if you look for the SMEs again, that's around about 1.5%. For the multinationals, only 0.5%. So the interest they have to pay might be higher because they have to take the bank loan and not the chance of financing via securities on the market. Banks seems to take a higher interest rate. And that's even if you look on the last comparison between SMEs and MNEs and the turnover profitability. Profitability of the small and mid-sized companies, nevertheless, is higher than of the multinationals. Might be a little bit astonishing, but that's the truth. Then the second look on financing of smaller or large companies. You see, the bank loan is much more important for small companies. There's only a very small part, or only a few companies which have the chance to finance via securities. But the larger companies here are financing more on the market. They are selling bonds or securities on the market that have the chance to finance with lower interest rates than these small and mid-sized companies. That's also a chart of the European Central Bank showing a very similar aspect. What I told you before, the main part of financing is here in Europe, bank loan. That's the yellow part. The red one, that's via the market, via bonds or securities. Now let's have a look on the purchasing program of the European Central Bank. So they have really a lot of financing programs, or asset purchase programs, they call it. And as well, they have a special pandemic program called Pandemic Emergency Purchasing Program. So that's an additional program because of the COVID-19 pandemic situation. Yes, they bought less at the end of 2019. We all had the hope that we have a real good economic situation, that it was really just before the COVID-19 pandemic. Then we started again to support the economy by these purchasing programs. So what is the ECB doing? They're buying the bonds, the government bonds, that are the bonds of the different states of the euro area, and they are buying also corporate bonds, bonds issued by companies. And there are many, many more, and if you will have a look on these, you can do that afterwards using the links I provided you here with. So the aim of the ECB using these purchasing programs is to support the market, to give them additional money into the market, and with additional money into the market, they have the hope that states and companies are investing this money and therefore will support the recovery and the economic development. Here in that case now, the ECB said, excuse me, going back to that one, they will have a total of 1,850 billion allowed to purchase. And they are buying, as I said, two different categories of bonds. So they are buying bonds of government of different states, and they're buying bonds of different companies. What does that mean? So I'll come to the effect. So there is the asset purchasing programs, the cumulative net purchases by program, and there are some figures from my side at the moment, not so important to look at the exact figures. They have now 13,000 billions outstanding bonds in their balance sheet. That's a development of the, here in my case, European Central Bank. My first question now is, and I want to discuss that with you afterwards. If the European Central Bank is buying bonds of different governments, of different states, they are buying that on the market, not directly financing the states, but they are buying their bonds. Is that financing states or not? That's my first question. Second one is a purchase program for commercial papers or securities of companies, an advantage for companies which are emitting securities or bonds. And I showed you that mainly the multinationals are emitting these securities. So is that an advantage for the multinationals if the ECB is buying their securities? We go then to the third question. Now let's have a look on the comparison between Germany and, for example, France. Once again, the red one is financing by corporate bonds. The yellow one, financing using the bank loans. If you compare now that to the French situation here, you see there is a little bit higher financing of the cooperatives using these corporate bonds. Look to Italy, look to Spain. Their situation is a little bit different. They have a lower financing situation at the moment, but also there we have a higher situation, higher financing using corporate bonds. Is that a disadvantage for the German SMEs in comparison to the French ones? Or also to the Italian or Spanish? And to show you that it's really true what I'm talking about, that's a list I filtered for the German multinationals, a list of the bonds bought by the European Central Bank. So that's what they bought from the market. They bought, and you might know some of these companies. They bought the Daimler, they bought Daimler, they bought some of the SAP, the software company, they bought some of the Allianz, the insurance company, or the BASF, the chemical company. So have these companies emitting bonds and securities, have they a better interest rate therefore? Because, and you know that, if prices are going up for these corporate bonds because also the ECB is buying them, vice versa, the interest rate is running down. So interest rate might be decrease because of the ECB policy for these companies. Here are some more figures for the European Central Bank. You see what they bought here: covered bonds, corporate bonds, commercial papers. But I will not focus on that because these are some special aspects of the market of if you buy the covered bonds or commercial papers and so on. Last comparison between different countries. Not comparison between the United States and Europe. If you look on the bank loans in the euro area, here on the left hand, bank loans are really responsible for more than 40% of financing a company. Looking for the same in the United States, there only nearly 20% are financed using bank loans, but much more using securities. Compare the 6.5 to the 28. So if you compare now the central bank policy of the European Central Bank and the Fed in the United States, it's really not the same. If they're doing the same, the influence on the market is different. So you have to keep that in mind if you compare the policy. Very last one, comparison also to the United Kingdom, to Japan. And that's done by the German Central Bank in their monthly report in January 2018. They showed that here market-based financing is much more important in the United Kingdom than in Europe. And here is bank loan again with the blue one, with the dark blue one, and the equity here, and other borrowed capital, and that's one of the other sources of capital. It's highlighted here, but here my focus is on the black point here, on the black circle. That's market-based financing. And that's really different if you look on different countries. So comparing central bank policy does not mean that if they're doing the same, the effects on the market are the same. And my argument here is that the ECB policy with purchasing corporate bonds is an advantage for the multinationals and a disadvantage for the so-called smaller or mid-sized companies. And at least we can also discuss if the policy is financing states or not. Many thanks for your attendance, and I hope that I can give you some insights on central bank policy. And now your questions are really welcome.
Muchas gracias al doctor Kerr por su presentación. Thank you, Dr. Kerr. Ahora es el momento de que el doctor Kerr pueda tomar algunas de las preguntas que ustedes puedan tener. Por favor, levanten de manera virtual su mano para poderles dar el uso de la voz. Now it's time for your questions for Dr. Kerr. If you want to make a question, please raise your virtual hand and I will let you have the use of the voice. So go ahead, please. Adelante, muchachos, con sus preguntas, por favor, si pueden levantar su mano. Eliu Chávez, I have your hand. Eliu, tienes tu mano levantada. Go ahead, please. Adelante, Eliu, por favor.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Well, my question here is, you asked if we think that the Central Bank of Europe was financing some countries, and I don't know, I don't really have an answer to that, because I think that if we speak literally, I mean, well, the Central Bank is autonomous, but it's actually giving finance, it's financing, but it doesn't sound good. It sounds like it's helping, and it has like some kind of, it gives some countries a little bit of a privilege. Like I think that I understood that it has some inclination to the France corporate purchase of corporate bonus. So I was thinking if you could explain further about that question, and well, that will be one of my questions.
Okay, thank you for your question. First of all, the discussion we have here in Europe is the policy of the ECB, of the European Central Bank, really financing states or countries. And they argue, the ECB is arguing that is not the case because they are buying the bonds on the market and not directly from the different governments, from the government of a state. You might say that's a sophisticated discussion because the effect at the end might be really the same, buying directly from the government or on the market. So therefore we have the discussion here in Europe on that topic. And at least also it should be that the central bank is, as you said, autonomous and not influenced by the policy of the different governments. So the only aim of the ECB should be price stability and not financing states. And if you know the politicians, they try to make more debt to finance, let's say, social aspects, more social insurances, and so on and so on. So therefore, we have really the rule that the ECB should not finance states. And you're really right that therefore we have the discussion. These programs, asset purchase programs, are at the end not will really finance the state, at least. The only thing what they are doing, they had an aim for each country, a limit for each country for buying bonds. That's perhaps the one argument against financing states. The next one, your question was if the comparison between French and German SMEs, in that case, really a disadvantage for the German SMEs, and I would say yes, because the interest rate using bonds is going down and down. So this ECB is supporting or decreasing interest rates using these bond financing. And the more you're financing via bonds, the more you have the advantage of it. And therefore, some German companies or more German companies have a disadvantage out of it. So that would be my argument. And also, not only for the French in comparison to the German ones, but also the multinationals have an advantage out of it because they have a profit out of it because they have lower interest rates, supported interest rates by ECB. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Here I have a question that from someone that is watching this conference using YouTube. This comes from Michel, and he asks, would you say that the excessive bureaucracy for SMEs in plenty of European countries would be an obstacle to achieve an economic recovery after the pandemic and the economic crisis?
Yes, I would agree to that argument. Because of what? The German economy is really depending on these small and mid-sized companies. So we have around about, I don't have the exact figures now, but around about 90% of all companies in Germany are SMEs, or small and mid-sized companies. In terms of sales, it's a little bit lower because the big ones have higher sales. But nevertheless, I would say the small and mid-sized companies have around about 60% of the GDP. And so we call it the small and mid-sized companies are the backbone of the German economy. And that, so far, I would agree on that argument.
Thank you, Dr. Kerr. Now I have a question from Professor Marcos Tlamayanco here in the room. Go ahead, Professor Tlamayanco. Adelante, Maestro Tlamayanco.
Yeah, hi, Marcos.
Hi, first, good morning here in Pachuca. Very nice to see you by this way, Dr. Henning. Liebe Grüße.
Thank you. Also, liebe Grüße.
We have heard about the behavior of the inflation rate and the loans rate, and it's very interesting how the situation of the ships in ports is creating a very important impact in commerce and in the inflation rates in the world. But now we are seeing in the international context changes. For example, in Germany, you have had elections the last weekend. So, what do you think the new government is affecting the economy for Germany, for Europe, and how is the perspective in this case? What do you think about it? And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you also for that question. So we had an election for the national parliament, and the thing is, we have no clear result. The only thing we can talk about is that the right-wing as well as the left-wing parties declined. So we have a concentration in the middle. But then we will have a coalition of at least, I would say, 3 parties. That's the most probable situation afterwards. Might be also that 2 parties are going together, but both of these said that they don't want to do that. So we'll have the Liberal Party, the Green Party, the party which is focusing on the environment, and the Social Democrats, and at least also perhaps the Christ Democrats. Between Christ Democrats and Social Party, that's then the difference, at least because the Liberal and the Green Party will go together and negotiating which of the bigger ones, the Social Democrats or Christ Democrats, what they will choose for the next chancellor. So it's a really interesting situation at the moment, but not a clear one. So I can't tell you what will be the situation for the market. The only thing, because it's going to the middle, we think of more or less stable development with a different focus. If the Social Democrats will do that or the Christ Democrats will do that in the coalition then afterwards. But we have not a clear situation until now. Perhaps not this an answer which will satisfy you, but that's the situation at the moment, not a clear one.
Thank you so much. So we must be expecting about the
we have to wait, yes.
in Germany and Europe, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tamayanco. And now I got a question from Dr. Ruth Ortiz. She's asking, do you consider that the monetary policies that some of the main central banks in the world have followed are suitable or are good for these crisis moments?
That's a question I can't answer at the end, because that's the discussion also in central banks. If you have a look on the ECB is, let's say, ruled by different central banks of the different states or the persons of the different central. They have different opinions, which is the right policy, which is a policy to, on the one hand, to control prices or control inflation. And on the other hand, they want to support the economy. But the only aim of the European Central Bank is price stability. So what have they done in summer this year? Until summer, we had the aim to have an inflation rate below, near, but below 2%. They demanded it a little bit. Now they are talking about, we have the aim to have an inflation rate of 2%, not anymore below, but 2%. And that might be in the long run. That says that an overshooting is accepted. So you see, therefore, we have a discussion in central banks, and they try to go more in the direction of supporting economy, even if the rules are only with the aim of price stability. So if you look for the Fed, they have a very similar situation. If you look on the debt, they have the discussion at the moment in the United States to rise up the budget. And if they will not do that, the Republican Party is at the moment responsible for that, because they don't want to accept the higher budget deficit. They have to have a shutdown then in the United States. So you see different central banks, but a similar situation.
Thank you, Dr. Kerr. I have another question from Dr. Adrian Gonzalez Romo. He's asking for your opinion about the decision that the Mexican government has made about using the International Monetary Fund money that was lent to Mexico to pay external debt. What do you think about that decision?
I think that's a good decision because that is increasing the chances for Mexico to for a better economic development. Because if you have to finance the debt on the market, mostly you have to finance that in a foreign currency. And if you look on financing that, for example, in the United States dollars, in the US dollars, then you have to be aware that in the near future, the yields will increase, and that would also increase the interest to be paid by Mexico. And therefore, financing via the IMF is the better solution, I think, because then we have the chance with a recovery to pay back this debt, but not to pay high interest.
Thank you, Dr. Kerr. And I have another question. This comes from Dr. Ruth Ortiz again. She's saying, is sovereign debt a factor that make increase the bad effects of the crisis, of the sanitary crisis over our national economy?
Might be, yes. Looking for the German government, they argue that we have, in comparison to other countries, a low budget deficit. That's at the moment around about 70% of the GDP. So in comparison, it's a low, but is that the right policy? Only to compare that with other countries with a worse situation. So I would think not. We have to look on our own situation, and we have, it's called a shadow deficit. We have to pay also all the pensions for the public sector and others. So we have a really high shadow deficit, not only the official one with the 70%. So we have to look for our own situation with a worse situation in another country.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I think we are on time, so we want to thank you for your participation. Agradecemos al doctor Henning Kerr por su participación y les invitamos a toda la audiencia. Bueno, primero queremos compartir con el doctor su reconocimiento. Thank you, doctor, for your conference. We want to share with you this paper that we have prepared for you. So let me share it with you. Let me see if I can do it. Okay, here we go. So I don't know if you can see it now, Dr. Kerr.
You started? Yes. Now I see that. So
okay.
We appreciate to participate in your conference, and it is always a pleasure for me to explain some aspects, even if this focus today was a little bit more European concentrated. But nevertheless, I hope that I explained a little bit of the policy of the European Central Bank and also the effect on the market. So
thank you very much. Thank you. If you allow me, I will. If you allow me, I will share the content of this paper with all the audience. It says, Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo, Instituto de Ciencias Económico-Administrativas, Área Académica de Comercio Exterior, otorga el presente reconocimiento al Dr. Henning Kerr por haber dictado la conferencia magistral Central Bank Policy in Times of Turbulence en el 7º Congreso Nacional y 2º Internacional de Estudiantes de Comercio Exterior, Amor, Orden y Progreso, San Agustín Tlaxiaca, 28 de septiembre de 2021. Está firmado por el doctor Jesús Ibarra Zamudio, nuestro director, y por la doctora Amada Hidalgo Gallardo, nuestra jefa de área académica. We thank you again, Dr. Henning Kerr, for your participation, and I'm asking everyone to leave the room, excepto Dr. Martin Keim. Dr. Martin, I ask you to stay here with us. Al resto de la audiencia les pido se retiren un par de minutos y soliciten nuevamente el acceso porque vamos a hacer con la transmisión que estamos haciendo en YouTube. Thank you again, Dr. Henning, and it's always nice to have you with us here in our institution.
Thank you, and may I be allowed to stay also with you? Then I have the chance to take part in the lecture of Martin.
Of course, you're always welcome to everything you want to be with us.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Al resto de nuestra audiencia, entonces, les pedimos se puedan desconectar ustedes un par de minutos en los que hacemos el ajuste para la conferencia del Dr. Kane. Dr. Kane, please stay with us.